As a matter of fact, in the great state of Mississippi, not very long ago, the rape and torture and bloodying and cudgeling of a woman would have had the sanction of law, and indeed of religion too.
But
so it's just not true to say that this difference is any criticism of my pointing out that these are our close cousins.
I'll close on this point, but it seems that your exception proves my point. The only way that human beings can do that is by excommunicating the person you do it to from the human species. So in some senses, you've got to make the other person less than human or non-human to justify doing it to them, and far from being an undermining of morality, that's a confirmation of it.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yes.
Now we come to the part of the debate where you get to ask questions. If you have questions for either of our participants, please make your way to one of the microphones at the end of the aisles. Please ask brief questions. Direct them either to Mr. Hitchens or Mr. D'Souza. When the person that you're requesting to answer your question does so, the other debater will have an opportunity to respond. And we'll begin on my left, sir.
This is a question for Dinesh. You mentioned the universal constants of physics about the improbability for our universe sustaining life. However, I want to know your response to this. Einstein said God does not play dice, which is you're postulating an improbable universe with no denominator. In other words, it might not have been any other way. There may be no other possibilities for universes. So what's your response to that?
I'll restate the question. The question is, hey, you've been talking about all these great coincidences, the so-called fine-tuning of the universe, but didn't the great authority Einstein say God does not play dice with the universe, and isn't Einstein's dictum a refutation of this notion of particularity and fine-tuning? Einstein's comment about God not playing dice with the universe was made in the context of the discovery of quantum physics. Einstein refused to believe that nature could be so erratic and unpredictable at the very tiny scale. And then as his life went on, Einstein had to admit that quantum physics was a premise that was not only as validated as the theory of relativity, but in some ways one of the most tested theories in all of physics. So Einstein was wrong. Einstein had to admit that his anxiety about quantum physics was misplaced, and his refusal to believe it one of the great mistakes of his life. So Einstein wasn't even addressing the anthropic principle of the fine-tuning, but in the one context where he used the phrase God does not play dice with the universe, it turns out God does.
Mr. Hitchens, you care to respond?
Einstein was he tried to avoid using the word God at all. He would sometimes use a sort of playful expression, the old one, and so forth. He tried not to personalize the question because he was so sure that you couldn't get from any speculation to a personal or intervening God. And though he was very often misrepresented on this point, if you're good enough to buy a copy of my Portable Atheist anthology available at fine bookstores everywhere, you can see a very exhaustive anthology of Einstein's views on this question, which were determinedly non-theistic.
Okay.
Thanks for coming out, y'all. This is also for Mr. D'Souza. I hate to overload him, but when you were making your rebuttal, you appealed to the uniqueness of Earth as evidence for God's existence. And I'm kind of confused. I don't see how a supernatural explanation that doesn't rely on scientific fact for its proof is any more likely or easier or anything than just chance.
Okay. The question is, why posit a creator? Why not say chance? Let me give you an analogy to illustrate my point. Let's say I entered the California State Lottery, and I win. I would say, that's chance. It's unlikely. There are a lot of people in California, but someone had to win, so I won. Now let's say that the next week I entered the Nevada State Lottery, the Utah Lottery, and the lottery in every 50 state, all the 50 states, and I win every single one. Then someone would say, well, that could be chance, but when you start multiplying the odds, human reason begins to rebel. So the point is, ultimately, chance is the preferred explanation when you are dealing with events that make sense by chance. I toss a coin and I get heads. If I toss it 100 times, I should get close to 50 heads and 50 tails. Let's say I get 99 heads. You're going to suspect I rigged the coin. You will immediately write off chance and presume design. So that's my point. Human reason operates by giving chance the benefit of the doubt, but when a coincidence becomes too big, you begin to suspect a designer.
So how come 99.9% of all species on Earth have been already rendered extinct? What design is that? Or would you prefer, since that's such depressing news, to attribute it to coincidence?
I'm not. First of
Random,
all, I don't think
these species were unlucky.
First of all, there are only a tiny percentage of species through time that have developed nervous systems, and at least by our understanding, experience, you might say, pain in the sense that we understand it. We're not sure a cockroach experiences pain. We're not sure that an amoeba does. So it's true that a lot of species have been wiped out through geological time, but to pretend like this is some kind of a divine genocide, I think is to misunderstand the laws of biology.
No, I wouldn't say it was a divine genocide unless you thought it was a plan. Nothing remains to be explained if you think these events happen randomly.
My point is, you're saying you think that the idea that you've got a lot of different species, one developing out of the other, you think that that refutes the idea of design, whereas to me it confirms it. If you have a few simple laws that are, you might say, not only, Richard Dawkins in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, says, isn't it amazing we have a watch? And then he says, nature is the blind watchmaker. And he goes on in the book to describe what could be called a watch factory, called evolution, that magically produces copies of itself, watches, and other things, which survive according to nature's laws. And so he finds a watchmaker factory, and he goes, this doesn't require explanation, this is due to chance. Wait a minute. If you have to explain a watch, you also have to explain the watchmaker factory. It's a rather ingenious device. Now, if you can say, Dawkins himself says that the original cell has more complexity than the Encyclopedia Britannica. And not even Darwin dared to suggest that the original cell has developed by evolution. Evolution presumes the existence of self-replicating cells and then tells how we can get from A to B and B to C, but it takes A for granted. So it seems to me rather unbelievable to pretend like we have somehow answered the argument for design when we are presuming extremely complex design at the beginning.
Yes.
Well, that was real.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here and giving us this enlightening discussion. My head, like many of us in the audience, is just awash with these interesting ideas. Nietzsche said famously that God was dead, and of course Freud, in a later sociological work called The Future of an Illusion, said that like all illusions, religious belief would eventually disappear. As you've pointed out, Western Europe is an example. The question is to Mr. Hitchens, you said that religion is a kind of vestigial holdover from our intellectual infancy. Do you think that we will all eventually outgrow it? And why is the relinquishing of religion seem to be so slow and uneven, particularly in the States?
A small correction. It's true Nietzsche said God was dead, and it's said by some that Freud said that God was dad. But it is not true that Freud said in The Future of an Illusion that it would wither away. Quite to the contrary. He said it was an illusion with a future. Because, he said, precisely of its rootedness in wishful thinking. For as long as humans are afraid of death and believe it's possible to survive it, or might be possible, there will always be a place for religion. Dinesh and I have had a lot of discussions about this. I think there is truth to that, but I think it's rather reductionist. There's no reason at all to think that precisely because we are only